Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So I'm finally getting to an article which I've had sitting around for a long time. I keep meaning to get to it, but other videos come up, other things which I've deemed more important at the time, and I keep pushing it back. And to be honest, I did record a version of this video once, but I wasn't happy with it. It was late at night when I recorded it, and I was rather tired, so I've decided to do it again, and I think it's worth the wait because there are some very, very interesting claims in this article, particularly towards the end. Some claims that the honey badgers, or at least some of the honey badgers, might be interested in seeing. In fact, I would recommend that maybe the honey badgers should get in contact with Rachel, the author of this piece of fiction, and possibly try to do an interview with her because it would be interesting to see her defend the claims. But, those claims are at the end of this article. So we've got a bit of stuff to get through first. But trust me, folks, it really is worth the wait to get to those claims at the end. And trust me, they're going to piss off a lot of people. So this article was written October last year by Rachel Stevens, who was a journalist student at Catholic University. Now, I don't know what's going on at Catholic University, but it seems that the journalistic course isn't doing too well because, well, how can I put it? I think Rachel's going to have a huge career at BuzzFeed. In other words, Rachel is not a good journalist. I'm sure she'll make a lot of money writing articles about how periods are part of patriarchal oppression or something like that. But, she'll never actually do any proper journalism, as you'll see. And this is the unfortunate thing about journalism today. We don't have journalists so much as people LARPing as journalists. They're kind of like someone dressed up as Superman going to a comic convention. They can't really fly or shoot laser beams from their eyes. It's just a costume. And that's pretty much what they're doing. They can't actually do journalism. They're just pretending. And they're not even doing a good job at that. Now, Rachel makes a lot of claims in this article and doesn't have a single citation. Not a single one. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today explaining to Rachel, not that she'll probably ever see this, exactly why citations are important. And I assume if she ever did see this, she wouldn't really pay attention anyway. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe she can prove me wrong. I'm not going to hold my breath, though. So the article is called The Danger of the Men's Rights Movement. I've got an alternate title for this article. It's called The Danger of Bad Journalism. Or maybe The Danger of Feminists Pretending to be a Journalist. I'm sure you can come up with your own variations of that title. Anyway, let's get stuck into it. She says,
"It is not a scary time to be a young male in America. It is a terrifying time to be a woman."
Well, the first two sentences, and I think Rachel's shown her bias. But anyway, let's continue because we have a lot more of this bullshit to get through.
"The men's rights movement has gained a considerable amount of traction in recent years, and it needs to be stopped."
Yes, that's right. A group of people daring to say that men have issues too should be stopped, because clearly they're a threat to the feminist narrative that only women's issues count. How dare MRAs talk about male suicide, or male victims of sexual abuse, or parental rights, or bodily integrity rights? What fucking monsters. Clearly they need to be stopped. She continues.
"Feminism is the movement for the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality between the sexes."
Well, it seems someone can read a dictionary. That's a start. But the advocacy of women's rights, okay? That's the problem, though, isn't it? The assumption that only women are somehow disadvantaged, and therefore only women need help, as opposed to, reality, where both genders have issues, where both genders have disadvantages and advantages. But good old feminism only wants to look at half the equation and only help half those people. even in circumstances where women clearly have the advantage. Why not give them more advantage and then call it equality, right? Anyway, she continues.
The movement focuses on equal rights in the economic, social, and political sphere. It is not hatred of men.
Except all the times that it is. It always amuses me, the cognitive dissonance within the feminist movement. We have basically half the feminist movement saying that it's okay to hate men, and in fact that we should hate men, and hating men is a good thing, and men are the problem, and men are the cause of all the issues in the world. And if only the superior women were in charge, we would be living in a feminist utopia where everyone was equal and no one went without, and everyone was treated humanely, except for men, because they don't deserve to be. But, that doesn't count anyway. So we have half the feminist movement saying that, and the other half saying, feminists don't hate men. We don't hate men. That's just a myth put out by those evil MRAs and the evil anti-feminists. We don't actually hate men. There are no feminists saying that they hate men. That's just a nasty myth. Of course, virtually the entire feminist movement is based on the premise that men are evil overlords that oppress helpless women. I would consider that to be hatred of men, right there. The very foundation of feminism is based on blaming everything on men, which is the hatred of men. That simple. You can't escape that. But let's continue.
It is a movement that has noticed that the treatment of men and women is unequal. Who does not want that?
Okay, you could have worded those two sentences a little bit better, maybe. Are you saying that people want the treatment of men and women to be unequal? No, I'm joking. Obviously, what she's saying is that the feminist movement has noticed that the treatment of men and women is unequal. They've noticed it. That's a start, I guess. Of course, noticing that the treatment of men is unequal isn't really the same as doing something about it, is it? And I would argue that most feminists haven't even noticed that the treatment of men can be unequal, as we will see in this article. Let's continue.
Equality seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it does, unless you're a feminist who sees the world in a black and white way, where men are the evil overlords and women their helpless victims. Then equality is pretty hard to see, because you're not actually looking at reality.
Unfortunately, MRM, or the men's rights movement, is a loose coalition of activists, with no official leader, that has coddled a generation of misogynists.
Really? How exactly do you define misogynist? Are you a misogynist for talking about men's issues? Are you a misogynist for disagreeing with feminism? Are you a misogynist for pointing out the faults of feminism? It would be nice if she had some citations of, for this generation of misogynists, but Rachel is a modern day journalist. She doesn't need citations. That's the old way of doing things. You don't need proof. It's much easier just to make up claims, as we're about to see.
These individuals not only resist equality, but outright threaten women.
Okay, how exactly are we threatening women? By wanting to talk about men's issues as well? I guess that is, in a sense, a threat to women, more specifically to feminists, as there are many women who are sympathetic to men's rights. Those women just aren't feminists. But how exactly are we resisting equality? By saying men have issues too and we should address those issues? That is somehow unequal? Strange.
It is an old position receiving new attention in the current state of online media and the rapid sharing of ideas.
An old position? Really? Yeah, I guess we do want to go back to the 1950s where we talked about male victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. That's all we talked about in the good old days, right? Just those male victims, that's all. Yes, in the good old days we were so concerned about male suicide and male homelessness. And let's not forget bodily integrity rights. Yes, in the 1950s, Oh, there was definitely no circumcision. That's something that came much, much later. Well done, Rachel. You've done spectacular research for this article. It's amazing. You have such a bright career ahead of you at BuzzFeed. It is astounding. The stars are really the limit. I mean, did I say stars? Sorry, I meant the gutter, because that's where gutter journalism belongs. Anyway, let's continue.
Today's MRM branches off of the men's liberation movement, which started in the 1970s.
Yeah, someone can read Wikipedia, and I think that's pretty much the extent of her research here.
Many men began to feel inferior to women who stood up for themselves in the pro-choice movement that was gaining force.
Feel inferior to women? Really? Saying men have issues too that need to be addressed is somehow feeling inferior to women. Such a strange argument. It's almost like she doesn't know what she's talking about. It's almost like she's just going from stereotypes as opposed to, doing actual research.
Subsequently, in the early 1990s, a book called The Myth of Male Power, Why Men Are the Disposable Sex, emerged from the author Warren Farrell. Many men swear by this novel as the group's manifesto, or Bible if you will.
It's interesting she uses the word novel. Does she not know what the word novel means? A novel. Let me help you out, Rachel. A novel is a fictitious prose narrative of book length, typically representing characters and action with some degree of realism. So a novel is a work of fiction. The Myth of Male Power is not a work of fiction. So I don't know if it's a slip up there and she doesn't know what the word novel means, or whether the word novel was intentional. It's pretty clear she hasn't read the book, so maybe she thinks it's a fictitious work. Or maybe she's saying that the claims in The Myth of Male Power are so outrageous that it's clearly a work of fiction. Who knows? Who knows? But, anyone who's actually read the book knows it's not a novel. Anyway.
It outlines the flawed argument that men are systematically disadvantaged in many ways.
Yeah, men aren't disadvantaged at all, like in sentencing or parental rights or anything like that. No, definitely not. No, that's definitely a flawed argument. There's definitely no validity to men having any disadvantages anywhere, because men are the evil oppressors, right? Oh, by the way, feminism doesn't hate men. Not at all. No, it just dismisses all our issues and pretends they don't exist. That's not hateful. Well, it's definitely not empathetic, is it? It's definitely not having sympathy for men. It continues.
It pushes an agenda that female sexual power eclipses any societal advantage men may have over women.
Does it really? It's good that you've got a citation to an example of the book doing that, Rachel. Oh, sorry, I forgot. You don't do citations, do you? How unfortunate. I'm sure you wouldn't be lying to us. I'm sure the arguments in The Myth of Male Power aren't, any more complex than what you've presented right there. Anyway, let's continue.
From this novel, there has been an emergence of men congregating online to encourage its aggressive rhetoric through threats on sites such as 4chan and Reddit.
Aggressive rhetoric. She clearly has not read the book. It does not have aggressive rhetoric. Maybe she's thinking of the Scum Manifesto. I don't know. Maybe she's got those two confused. But the very notion that Warren Farrell has written anything aggressive is amusing. He is such a polite, gentle man. Now, I've never met him in real life, unfortunately. I would love to. I've got a lot of respect for the man. But suggesting that Warren Farrell or anything he has written is aggressive is very amusing. I would suggest that she knows next to nothing about Warren Farrell, the Myth of Male Power, or the men's rights movement, which shouldn't come as a surprise because Rachel is a modern-day journalist, or LARPing as a journalist. As for threats on sites such as 4chan and Reddit, Well, once again, Rachel doesn't do citations or examples. So, what exactly are these threats? Is that questioning feminism, maybe? And does she realise that there are people on 4chan and Reddit who aren't MRAs? In fact, there are feminists on 4chan and Reddit. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there groups on Reddit which are anti-MRA, which are filled with feminists? I'm pretty sure there are. That's why it always amuses me when articles like this say that, 4chan and Reddit are filled with MRAs. Basically what they're saying is anything on those sites which we don't like is said by a men's rights activist, even when that person's not an MRA. But, why let the facts get in the way? That's proper journalism. We don't do that here, do we, Rachel? Rachel's a propagandist, not a proper journalist. She goes on to say,
For some, this manosphere is a safe space to air their grievances against preferential treatment of women in custody battles or the unrecognized amount of sexual abuse against men.
Okay, what is wrong with that? You claim that feminism is about equality, yet you have a problem with men expressing their grievances against unfair treatment in court when it comes to custody, and about sexual abuse against men. I would think that anyone really interested in equality would want to address those things. Right? Right, Rachel? I guess you're not really interested in equality, though. Also, she uses the term manosphere here. Let me point out once again, for what feels like the 10,000th time, that the manosphere and the men's rights movement are not synonymous.
While these are issues of their own.
Oh, so she does admit that men have some issues. Well, that's interesting considering what she said previously in this article. But anyway, let's continue.
It is fostering a disturbing amount of aggressive rhetoric and even physical violence against women as a result of men trying to get rid of their suffering.
Do you note suffering in talking marks? Because apparently men don't really suffer. Apparently men are incapable of suffering. A father losing custody of his kids doesn't really suffer, according to Rachel. Or a man who is sexually abused doesn't really suffer. Or maybe she's saying that male suffering just doesn't count. It's not real suffering. We really shouldn't have much sympathy for men who suffer, right? Is that what you're saying, Rachel? Makes you a pretty big scumbag, doesn't it? Not really that big on equality, are you, Rachel? But exactly what is this aggressive rhetoric, Rachel? You don't give us any examples, because Rachel doesn't do citations. That would actually be journalism as opposed to propaganda, wouldn't it? And she says even physical violence against women. Well, the interesting thing is there are no recorded instances of MRAs being violent towards women. Now, there are lots of pieces of propaganda out there claiming that people who aren't MRAs have been violent towards women. People who don't identify as MRAs, who don't talk about men's rights issues, who don't claim to be part of the men's rights movement, and have never actually mentioned the men's rights movement. So it would be strange to class them as MRAs, wouldn't it? But as for actual MRAs, no. There's never been an actual recorded incident of an actual MRA being violent towards a woman. Let's continue.
There have been recorded instances of men beating women in the name of MRM.
Really, Rachel? Citation needed. Now, spoilers. That claim right there ties into her big claim at the end of this article. The one that's going to piss off a lot of people. But we'll get to that soon enough. There's some more bullshit to get through before we get to that. She then goes on to say,
I personally glanced through many Reddit pages of men detailing their attack on a woman and being proud of it, and I won't quote any of it because I believe it is incredibly disturbing.
Wow. That's real journalism there. Saying, yeah, I've got evidence, but I'm not going to show it to you. You're just going to have to take my word for it. I can't imagine that such a system of journalism would ever be abused. Now, coincidentally, I did have a look at Rachel's Twitter feed, and Rachel is a Nazi. She is like, full on Hitler worshipping, putting Jewish babies in blenders, goose stepping, swastika wearing Nazi, like full on. Now, I could actually show you all those tweets, but they're incredibly disturbing, and I don't want to disturb you. I don't want to give you nightmares by showing you what an incredible Nazi Rachel is, what an incredible monster she is. You're just going to have to take my word for it, right? Because I'm sure I wouldn't be saying that to make a point. I'm sure it's 100% true, right? We don't need no examples or citations. We're doing modern journalism. This is apparently what they teach their students at Catholic University. Just make stuff up. That's okay. No one will notice. And I mean, if anyone questions, you as a journalist, just accuse them of being a misogynist. That seems to work. I mean, that's the only reason someone would criticize a woman, right? But sarcasm aside, let me teach Rachel a little bit about journalism. Not that I've ever studied it, but, coincidentally, neither has Rachel, it seems. Now, I doubt Rachel's going to watch this video, and if she started watching, I doubt she would have made it this far, but just in case she has, grab a pen and paper, Rachel, and take some notes down, because this is important stuff. This will help you out if you're serious about becoming an actual journalist as opposed to being a propagandist and a joke. There are 4 reasons why you should actually show us this incredibly disturbing examples. These incredibly disturbing examples, right? 4 reasons. The first one is you could be making it up. It's quite possible that these incredibly disturbing examples don't exist. Okay, people lie, that is a fact, and some of those people who lie are women. Now, just for the record, just so Rachel doesn't take me out of context and straw man me, I'm not saying all women lie all the time, or that only women lie. I'm saying that everyone lies at some point to some degree, and that includes women. And that includes women who are journalists, or in Rachel's case, women who are pretending to be a journalist. And there is no reason why we should just take your word for it, Rachel, especially considering the weight of your claim. It is a very, very serious accusation, and there should be something to back it up, especially considering you make some other very serious claims in this article, which are bullshit, clearly fucking bullshit, and you don't provide any evidence to back it up. This destroys your credibility. This proves that you are a liar. So, yes, the first reason why you should use a citation and examples is because some people lie. And I would assume that if there was a right-leaning publication which made claims about feminists and they didn't provide any evidence or any examples, Rachel would be the first one to say that they should and that they're probably lying. The exact same standards apply to you, Rachel. The second reason that journalists should use examples and citations is what I like to call the interpretation filter. Now, the interpretation filter is when some people read something which can be taken one way and they take it a completely different way. Instead of taking it in the most logical, straightforward meaning of the term, they read into it the most uncharitable interpretation. The interpretation filter can take a perfectly innocent statement and twist it into something which it's not. Let me give you a very mundane example. Let's say I made the statement, I went into the bank and I left with some money. Now, how would most people interpret that statement? The most logical, straightforward way would be to think that I went into the bank, I went up to the teller, I withdrew my own money from my own account, and then I left with it in my pocket, right? Because that's something that people do thousands of times a day all around the world. So that would be the most logical interpretation. Now, the most uncharitable interpretation would be that I went in with a gun, I held up the bank, and I left with money which wasn't my own. Now, technically, that could be an interpretation of that statement, but you're reading a lot into it. You're inserting a lot of things which aren't there. You're making a lot of assumptions, and those assumptions are as negative as possible. Now, do bank robberies take place? Well, yes, they do. But they're not as common as people going in and taking money out of their own account. And there's nothing in the original statement which would suggest that I robbed the bank. So, if these comments do exist, because we can't actually see them, we don't know if Rachel has run them through her interpretation filter, and something which can be interpreted as something perfectly innocent has been interpreted as something incredibly disturbing. Once again, this is something I see all the fucking time. This is something very, very common, unfortunately. And it's important that we can go and look and interpret for ourselves, as opposed to relying on Rachel, who may not be completely unbiased. I don't know why I would think that, considering the quality of this article, but I suspect that Rachel might be a little bit biased. I suspect that maybe she runs things through an interpretation filter. Just a guess. Okay, so the third reason why actual journalists should use citations and examples is things being taken out of context, or quote mining. For example, if someone were to say something like, Hitler wanted to exterminate all the Jews, which was monstrous, and I'm glad he died, the interpretation of that statement is pretty straightforward. The person making the statement is clearly anti-Hitler. But if you quote mine it as exterminate all the Jews, it can be interpreted as something completely different. In fact, the exact opposite. It can be presented as something pro-Nazi. And in fact, we recently saw this dishonest trick in an article about Sargon. They misrepresented Sargon by quote mining and presented his position as the exact opposite of what it is. So, because we don't have an example from Rachel, we don't know if she's quote mining. Assuming that these quotes actually exist, these examples actually exist, and assuming that they haven't been run through an interpretation filter, how do we know that they're in proper context? How do we know that they haven't been taken out of context by Rachel or misinterpreted or quote mined? We don't. And that's why you need to give examples and citations, Rachel, just so you know. Now, the fourth reason why you need to give citations and examples is, how do we know that these people are men's rights activists? Let's assume that the quotes actually exist, the examples actually exist. Let's assume that they haven't been run through an interpretation filter. Let's assume that they haven't been quote mined or taken out of context, and they are incredibly disturbing. Well, how do we know that they're made by men's rights activists? Considering this is an article about MRAs, these incredibly disturbing statements are only valid if they're made by actual MRAs. And considering about 95% of articles about MRAs aren't actually about MRAs, but are instead about pickup artists or incels or white supremacists or the alt-right or whoever, anyone who disagrees with feminists, basically. I think it's a fair question to ask. How do we know that they're MRAs? I mean, I even came across one article claiming that basically anyone who isn't a feminist is automatically an MRA. Even a baseball team are MRAs, which is insane. If you're not talking about and advocating for men's rights issues, you're not a fucking MRA. That simple. Being a men's rights activist requires you to be an activist for men's rights. Feminists don't seem to get this. They don't seem to be able to understand this very simple thing, right? It's like being a truck driver. To be a truck driver, you actually have to drive a truck. If someone pointed to someone on a push bike and said, "Look at that truck driver over there," it's not really that accurate, is it? Now, sure, maybe the guy on the push bike has driven a truck at some point. Okay, but yeah, maybe you can provide some proof of that instead of just assuming that anyone on a push bike is a truck driver. because that's basically what they're doing here. Anyone who disagrees with their particular brand of feminism, in their eyes, is automatically an MRA. In fact, talking about Twitter once again, that shithole Twitter, there is a constant war between third-wave intersectionalist feminists and second-wave TERFs. The third-wave intersectionalist feminists claim that anyone who is against trans rights is automatically a men's rights activist, even though the men's rights movement is not against trans rights. They just assume that MRAs are automatically the exact opposite of their position, which includes TERFs, or trans-exclusionary radical feminists. Now, the ironic thing about this is the TERFs, at the same time, are pointing their fingers at the third-wave intersectionalist feminists, calling them MRAs, because they assume that anyone who is in favour of trans rights is automatically an MRA. So we have two opposing groups of feminists, each calling each other MRAs, and neither group actually being MRAs or advocating for men's rights. This is insane. This is fucking insane. But this is what we put up with all the fucking time. Let me stress again, 95% of the claims made against MRAs are not made against actual MRAs. It is the most common argument used against us. And I think it speaks volumes that they can't actually find MRAs to use as examples, that they have to go outside the men's rights movement to find examples. And in fact, Rachel does this very thing later on. Trust me, we'll get to that. So those are the 4 reasons, Rachel, why it's important that actual journalists use actual citations and actual examples. Not that you'll listen, but, I thought I'd tell you anyway. Let's continue. Well, I'm about halfway through making the video, and there's been a bit of an update. You see, I sent a tweet to Rachel on Twitter in an attempt to get some citations. In particular, the claim she makes at the end, that claim that's going to piss everyone off. To my surprise, she actually replied. Now, I've been doing this a long time, and I've actually tweeted at a lot of different journalists asking questions about articles, often for citations, and I always do so politely, by the way, but their standard response is just to block me or to be abusive or, whatever. But in this case, Rachel did reply, and to give her credit, she was polite, which made me feel a little bit guilty because I've been pretty harsh on her in this video. And then I remembered some of the things she says in her article, and suddenly I didn't feel guilty anymore. But I do have to give credit where credit is due, and she was polite, and she did respond, and she did give me some citations, which we will look at a little bit later. In the meantime, we have a little bit more article to get to, including that really offensive claim at the end, which I know you're all waiting to see. Trust me, it's worth the wait. So let's go on and get through the last little bit. She continues,
Non-physical implications of the MRM are everywhere. Many of these same men are out crying to redefine what the word rape means.
Well, yeah, this is actually true, but not in the way that she means. Now, I think what she means, considering the tone of the article, is that we want to restrict what is actually rape and therefore make less things rape. Right? When the actual opposite is true. We are actually trying to get things included as rape, namely male victims. That's why we start petitions in England, for example, trying to get the definition of rape changed. Now, for more information on this, I'm going to refer to a recent video which I spent an hour going through all this type of stuff. So I don't want to go through it again here, because we do have a lot of other stuff to get through. But she is right, but just not in the way she thinks she is right. Anyway, let's continue.
In that same lens, they are attempting to draft legislation to cut off state funding for sexual assault clinics who do not treat men. They would rather these clinics be shut down than serve women who need it.
Well, this is an interesting claim. Why would MRAs, or anyone for that matter, be concerned about government funding to clinics which only treat one group of people and not everyone? Well, that would be because it's discrimination, right? Now, let me put it in terms that a social justice advocate might understand. They tend to understand things when they're put in a racial sense, more so than when they're put into a gender sense. Well, that is when the disadvantaged gender is male. So imagine you had a group of clinics which were government funded, given money by Trump, right? And these clinics only treated white people. Whenever a person of colour turned up at the door, they were turned away because these clinics were white only. Now, do you think maybe social justice advocates would want to shut these down? Do you think they might find them discriminatory? Do you think they might say government money shouldn't be going towards something which is clearly bigoted? Of course, and they would be right. I would support them in that cause. Do you think the argument they would rather these clinics be shut down than serve white people who need it would be a good counter-argument? No, that would not be a good counter-argument, would it? Clearly the people trying to shut down these clinics are trying to get them to open up to everyone. Alright, if you want to run a private clinic which only sees certain people, then get private funding. If you're getting government funding, these clinics should be open to everyone. They shouldn't be discriminatory. And not discriminatory based on race or gender, or any other factor for that matter. This is a simple thing. She continues.
People don't realize the heavy presence of the MRM on social media. Misogynistic memes are circulating constantly. They are not funny, and they only help their movement grow every time they get shared.
Yep, misogynistic memes, yep. Because, only MRAs use memes, right? Now, first of all, let's define what misogynistic is. How does she define misogynistic memes? Are they memes making fun of feminism, criticising feminism? What exactly is the criteria? Because there are plenty of memes criticising MRAs and more commonly men in general. Are they misandric? I thought you said feminism doesn't hate men, but you seem to be using a different standard of evidence here. Some people circulate so-called misogynistic memes on social media and suddenly that's proof that men's rights activists hate women. But when feminists and women in general put out misandric memes, that's not hatred of men. No, that's just humour, right? Yeah. And like I said, how do you know these misogynistic memes are put out by MRAs and not just people in general? What makes them specific to men's rights activists? She continues.
The scariest part is that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is giving these men a platform.
Is he really? Where do I get my platform? I mean, I'm an Aussie, so it would be strange that he's given me a platform. But yeah. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. Trump has done one or two good things, namely, he's looked into Title IX in universities, which is very important because due process is extremely important. And chipping away at due process rights is extremely bad. But Rachel's not going to tackle any of that issue. She's not going to bring up any of that, not going to talk about any actual issues. She continues.
It's a very scary time for young men in America, Trump said.
Well, yeah. If you're going to university and you're kicked out based on an accusation and don't have the chance to have legal representation or defend yourself, yeah, that is a pretty scary time. That's called due process rights, Rachel. In case you're unaware, they happen to be the cornerstone of our legal system. Just a little thing. Not that important, really, right? She continues.
The response has brought an outcry of men essentially saying that the president endorses the MRM, so they must be right.
Really? An outcry of men? You do realise, Rachel, that most people have never heard of the men's rights movement. We are a very small, very grassroots movement. We are not the Illuminati. We are not the patriarchy. We do not have a lot of influence. In fact, I doubt Trump has even heard of us. Although he may have read about us in some of these feminist hit pieces, which are constantly circulated on the internet. I don't know if he reads a lot of them, but he is definitely mentioned in a lot of them in connection to the men's rights movement, for no particular reason other than feminists don't like both of us. But I think you're giving us credit for being much larger and much more powerful than we actually are. Now, that's not to say that we don't have some influence. We definitely have feminists on the back foot, which is a pretty big thing considering how small we are and how well-funded and large they are. But they seem to be quite scared of us. It seems to be a David and Goliath type thing. And, the proof of that is these constant hit pieces, constantly churned out on a daily basis, filled with nothing but lies and misinformation. They wouldn't be doing that if they weren't afraid of a counter-narrative, possibly gaining ground. She continues.
On the flip side, many women in the Me Too movement are hurt by his words.
Oh, they're hurt by his words. Well, we can't have women with hurt feelings, can we, Rachel? That should be a crime. Mind you, keep in mind that Rachel put suffering in talking marks when referring to men who are going through various issues, including sexual assault. That's not real suffering. That's suffering in talking marks. But women being offended by things Trump says, major issue. We need to stop everything and deal with that because that's the major concern. We can't have women being offended by someone's words. That is a major crime, much more important than men suffering from sexual assault and losing their kids in family courts. Those things apparently aren't important. Right, Rachel? Because that's the message that you're sending here. Not exactly an advocate for equality, are you? She continues.
Sexual assault is no joke, and the MRM and Donald Trump believe that women make up sexual assault for fun to mock and ruin men. Since when is it fun to just make up an entire sexual assault case?
Okay, let me be very clear, Rachel. No one is claiming that women make up sexual assault for fun. There are a number of reasons why some women make up sexual assault and rape allegations. For example, some of these women are mentally ill. I've often said that I think there is a connection between Munchausen syndrome and false allegations. I don't know if there's ever been a study done on that, but I think maybe there should be. There's also revenge. Someone breaks up with you and you want to get back at them, so you make an allegation. There's plenty of examples of that. And there are even women who make up false rape allegations as an excuse. There was a case in England where someone accused an ex-boyfriend of raping her because she fucked up at her exams and she needed an excuse. The guy went to jail for a short time while they tried to sort things out, and it turns out that he was at work in a different town while these rapes were supposedly taking place. So, completely innocent. But, she didn't think it was a big deal to potentially ruin this guy's life just so she had an excuse. Now, I'm not suggesting all women do this, or the majority of women do this, or that the majority of rape allegations are in fact false. But feminists themselves put the number at 2 to 10%, which is not a small number. 10% is not a small number. That's 1 in 10. That means it's fairly common, and that means we should look at every single case based on the evidence, and at no point should we take away anyone's due process rights, which is what we're really concerned about. But no one is saying that women make up rape allegations for fun. That is bullshit. Although I will say, and this ties into Munchausen syndrome, that some women do make up rape allegations for attention. Now, if you don't know what Munchausen syndrome is, it's where someone, and it's predominantly women, fakes an illness to get attention and sympathy, and in some cases actually makes themselves ill. There's also another version of this called Munchausen by proxy, once again mainly affecting women, where they will make a child sick in an attempt to get sympathy and attention. Now, these women aren't doing it for fun. They're doing it because they have a psychological need for attention and validation. They are mentally ill, right? In many ways, they themselves are victims. Not that that excuses them victimizing others, of course, but they're obviously not doing it for fun. They're doing it for attention and validation. And every time someone comes forward publicly concerning a rape allegation, there is a lot of attention and a lot of support. Once again, not saying all cases or the majority of cases. I'm just saying we need to look at everything on a case-to-case basis and not automatically conclude that the male must be guilty simply because he's been accused. Let's continue. We have one paragraph to go.
The occurrences of false sexual assault accusations are incredibly low.
Well, no. According to feminists, they're between 2 and 10%. And I'm being generous here and using feminist statistics. I could use other statistics which put the number at much higher, but let's go with the feminist statistics. Let's steelman you. Let's give you the best case scenario. 2% means 1 in 50. 10% means 1 in 10. 1 in 10 is not incredibly low. If you had a 1 in 10 chance of dying every time you went on a plane, I don't think you would say that your chances of dying are incredibly low. I don't think you would say it's a safe system of transportation. And of course, this only takes into account cases that go through the court system. It doesn't take into false allegations on social media or false allegations at universities which get people kicked out without due process. There are those words again, due process, the insignificant thing, Rachel, that we're so concerned about. And of course, the 2% or 10% figure doesn't take into account all the cases of false allegation which aren't proven because there's no evidence. So it's at very least 10% and possibly much higher. It's actually what we call a dark number because we don't know what the actual percentages are. Now, once again, I go into this in more detail in a recent video, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now because I've got a lot to get through. Almost done, but there's still a fair bit. So no, false accusations are not incredibly low. She continues.
The claim that it's a scary time for young men in America is false.
Really, Rachel? Now let me give you an example of one thing that's scary for young men in America. Are you unaware of young black men being shot by cops? Now, you being concerned about social justice, I would assume that is an issue that you're concerned with, right? Because you would consider that racism because they're black. I'm betting you haven't taken into account the fact that they're also male.
So let me start with our blindness. Think about when we hear of a police officer shooting a black boy. We rightly protest, Black Lives Matter. But no one even thinks of saying, boys' lives matter.
Black women aren't getting shot at the same number as black men, are they? It's just not happening. This is something which is happening to black men. And if you look at statistics, it's not just happening to black men, but it's happening to men in general. Now, the percentage for black men is much higher than white men. That is true. But the percentages for men in general are much higher than the percentages for women in general. And that's just one thing, Rachel. That's just one thing that you as a social justice advocate should be concerned about. Not just for black men, but for men in general, if you're actually concerned about social justice and equality. And I could mention numerous other things which, some of which I've already mentioned in this video. But I'm going to go on because, like I said, we still have a bit to get through. She continues.
MRM attempts to redefine rape by claiming rape statistics are overinflated, female-on-male assaults do not receive enough attention, and that false rape reports occur more often than is shown on media.
Okay, so we have a few things to break down here. Do feminists inflate rape statistics? Yes, they do indeed. In fact, one of my very early videos showed them doing this. A professor at a university, I think it was a law professor if I remember correctly, claimed that 1 in 3 American women will be raped in their lifetime.
For a long time. But first of all, I would just like to say that we're delighted and honored to have with us today Professor Patricia J. Williams, who many of our students have read her work, etc. Professor Williams is the James L. Dorr Professor of Law at Columbia Law School of Columbia University, where she's had an academic appointment since 1991. Professor Williams is extremely well known as one of the world's leading specialists on gender, race, and law, and specifically she works in the area of gender and critical race theorizing, or the consideration and critique of...
But this new kind of vigilante feminism that has ultimately, become embodied in people like Sarah Palin, sort of the Thelma and Louise variety of feminism, that actually, justifies a kind of that coalesces an element of rage and loss that accompanies, I think, the amount of trauma that really reflects, I think, the trauma of 1 in 3 women having experienced rape in this country, but our lack of legal, prosecutorial, police response to that.
Now, I traced this statistic back to its original source, and it originated from the World Health Organization. And the statistic there was that 1 in 3 women worldwide will be either physically or sexually assaulted in their lifetime. So you'll note it's physical or sexual assault, not just sexual assault. So from memory, this was then taken and changed to 1 in 3 women in the world will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. So all those physical assaults were magically transformed into sexual assaults. And then that was transformed again to 1 in 3 American women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. So worldwide was magically transformed into American. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the occurrences of rape will not be consistent worldwide. There are some places where there is much more rape than other places. Alright, it's not the same percentage everywhere. So you can't just take a worldwide figure and then apply it to America. But that's what they did. Now, if that's not inflating statistics, I don't know what is. And that's just one example. I mean, I could go on about Mary Koss and numerous other things, but, they've been debunked numerous times in the past. So let's go on to the next claim. Female on male assaults do not receive enough attention. Yes, that's true. Once again, I'll refer to that recent video where I talk about rape and statistics, and we find in that if we include forced to penetrate as rape, which it should be classed as rape, but it's not, then we would find that 1 in 4 rapes actually occurs to men. That's the lifetime figure. If we look at the last 12 months figure, we find that it's almost 50-50. Now, the stats I used in that video were from 2010 because the person I was replying to was using stats from 2010. But if you look at more recent stats, you'll find basically the same results. And the last claim she made, and that false rape reports occur more often than is shown on media. Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, not every rape case goes to the media, right? So not every false rape case is talked about in the media. And as I said, the feminists claim that it's 2 to 10%, but they're only cases which are proven. What about all the cases where it's a he said, she said situation? Now, I'm not suggesting that all he said, she said cases are false allegations, but some of them have to be. It's crazy to think that the police somehow determine 100% of false allegations when it's a he said, she said situation. It's just illogical to think that. Anyway, let's continue.
Men are taking these words to the street. In Canada over the summer, an MRM group took it upon themselves to cover the city of Edmonton with posters stating, "Just because you regret a one-night stand doesn't mean it wasn't consensual." These are clear aims to shame young women for no good reason.
Okay, now, she doesn't have a citation for this in the article, although she did provide one when I contacted her via Twitter, but I knew of this particular thing anyway. In fact, I'm good friends with the founder of Men's Rights Edmonton, Nick Redding. I know all about the Don't Be That Girl posters. Now, what Rachel leaves out here is full context. She doesn't say that these posters were in response to a series of feminist posters, which is, a fairly important thing, right? You would think that if someone is a serious journalist and they're trying to be unbiased, they would give proper context to what's actually going on. She's presenting this as, these MRAs just decided to go and put posters all over the city to shame women. No. The poster campaign, which was back in 2013, by the way, Rachel, not 2017 like you seem to think. The poster campaign was in response to an anti-male campaign put out by feminists. Now, Rachel's citation, which she provided to me when I asked via Twitter, is Sexual Violence in the Manosphere, Anti-Feminist Men's Rights Discourses on Rape. Now, I remember reading this when it came out a few years ago, and it does talk fairly extensively about men's rights, Edmonton. But it clearly says that it's in response to Don't Be That Guy posters. In fact, let's have a look at this poster which is featured in her citation. It's got theft isn't black, bank fraud isn't Jewish, and rape isn't male. Just because you're paid to demonize men doesn't mean rape is gendered. Now, this poster clearly demonstrates what the purpose was. It wasn't to shame young women, it was to counter an anti-male narrative. Now, once again, let me just say that as I recently showed in a video, link below, if we look at the last 12 months and we include forced to penetrate as an act of rape, which it is, the statistics show that rape is almost 50-50, male-female. So they're right. Rape is not male. It's not a gendered issue. Unless, of course, you exclude female on male rape. Right, Rachel? Now, her next claim is even more interesting, and this is why it's very, very important to have citations and to have examples, clear examples, that people can go and investigate themselves. I know I keep making this point, but it's fucking important, and this is why. She goes on to say,
Beyond this incident, members on an online MRM forum sought their own version of justice against a student at Ohio University who they were convinced was falsely accusing a man of rape. In the end, they targeted the wrong woman altogether.
Okay, this is absolute bullshit. She gets everything wrong here, which isn't a surprise because this is the way it's been reported by feminists, but it's false. First of all, let's have a look at the actual incident, the Ohio University, where she says they were convinced it was a false accusation. Well, it was a false accusation. There is no doubt that it is a false accusation for a number of reasons. Firstly, it was investigated by the police and they found that it had no merit. Secondly, there was numerous people taking video of it. Now, in case you are unfamiliar with this particular case, I think it was on a Friday night, a young woman and a young man, both university students, went out drinking. I think they might have just met that particular night. And they hooked up in public with a crowd watching. The young man performed oral sex on the woman. She was pushing his face between her legs, which is a strange type of rape. And clearly, it was not against her will. You'd have to be crazy to come to that conclusion. Now, the next day, because this was public and there was a group of people watching it, and everyone's got a camera on their phone now, the next day there was footage on the internet and photos as well, and the young woman was embarrassed and she claimed it was rape. Yeah. So what about the so-called men's rights group that supposedly doxed the wrong person? Well, the doxing the wrong person part is correct. It's just the bit about the men's rights group is wrong. First of all, it was an individual, not a group. And secondly, he's not an MRA. He's actually an outspoken anti-MRA.
But one, I'm not an MRA. I've never called myself an MRA. I don't claim to be an MRA. And for sure as hell, I'm not a leader of any MRAs, right? So anything that I say trying to be attributed as an MRA or a leader of the MRAs is patently ridiculous.
Yeah, so that's who Rachel thinks is a men's rights activist. But it gets a lot worse than that. Just in case you don't know who this guy is, his name's Peter Nolan. That's not his only name. He goes by about 20 different names. I can't remember them all. I think it's like Peter Andrew Nolan, Joseph Boehm, or something like that. I can't remember. He's constantly changing his name, so who knows what name he's going by now. But he's a crazy man who is not an MRA. Men's rights activists hate him, and he hates us, and we have nothing in common except mutual hate for each other. AVFM have even written articles about him saying that he's a crazy man and we are not associated with him in any way whatsoever. He in turn has said that if he ever met Warren Farrell, he would shoot him because, he's a crazy man. Men's Rights Sydney has also done articles on him, calling him a crazy man. And I've had a couple of run-ins with him as well over the years. In fact, this is what he had to say about me.
Bain 666 is either a very ignorant man or an NSA, CSA PSYOP agent, so one of the two. So he's the first thing I would put in a stake in the ground is Bain 666 is ignorant, he's a liar, and he's very possibly a CIA NSA plant.
Yeah, so he thinks I'm a CIA plant. Did I mention he's a crazy man? So well done, Rachel. Well done. You fantastic journalism there. You've really picked a very prominent MRA. I mean, with writing like that, you'll be the next Laurie Penny in no time. And the reason why I say that is because Laurie Penny has mentioned Peter Nolan before in connection to the men's rights movement. Well, not exactly, because Laurie Penny, being the amazing journalist that she is, mixed up Peter Andrew Nolan with Paul Elam and somehow combined the two into Paul Nolan, and claimed that this leader of the men's rights movement was advocating for the killing of women. Yeah, well done, Laurie Penny. Well done. Fantastic journalism. Who can beat that? Did she go to Catholic University as well? Is she teaching a course there? I suspect she might be. I suspect that Rachel might be in her class. Oh, and for the record, it was Peter Nolan who was advocating the killing of women because he's a crazy man. As I might have mentioned. Did I mention that? Did I mention he's a crazy man? Because he is. He's also not an MRA. Next.
Many incidents such as these are igniting larger actions from the group. Men who join the MRM are insecure.
I find this funny for two reasons. Firstly, you're not going to last long as an MRA if you've got a thin skin, because we are constantly abused by feminists online. Not just, people on Twitter, but the media, as Rachel has demonstrated in this article. She said some horrendous things about us, and the worst is yet to come, as you will see. If you're easily offended by people saying things to you online, you're really not going to last long as an MRA. So to claim that we're insecure is a fucking joke, is laughable. Plus, why would you say someone's insecure if they're concerned about men's issues? How does that make sense in any conceivable way? But the other reason why the claim that we're insecure is funny is because there's been a bit of an update with the tweets and Rachel since I mentioned it earlier. It seems someone called her a bad person and she got a little bit upset. Yeah, you're going to have to grow a thicker skin than that, Rachel, if you want to make it as a journalist. Just a word of advice. And if you're going to throw shit at other people, especially when that shit is unfounded, you're going to expect some kind of criticism. And calling you a bad person is pretty fucking light compared to the shit that you say to us, especially the shit that's coming up. Now, just a quick note. I've gone over an hour, and I didn't want the video to be this long, but, here we are. So, I'm going to do a part 2 in which I look at her citations and her tweets, as opposed to doing them in this video. That video is going to be a lot shorter. It'll probably be 10 to 20 minutes max. But in the meantime, let's go on, because we've still got a little bit to go.
They feel insecure about themselves because women are becoming more empowered.
Why exactly would we be insecure about women becoming empowered? We're not against women's rights. We're against feminist ideology, and there is a difference. There is a massive difference. But, you won't learn that from inside an echo chamber, Rachel. You're going to have to stick your head out if you want to, see the whole picture, right? Next.
Sure, they may have a point that men who are sexually assaulted don't receive enough care, but that does not negate the fact that most rape is committed by men to women.
Okay, as I've pointed out a couple of times now in this video, the statistics are not as one-sided and clear-cut as you might think, Rachel. And second of all, are you suggesting we should ignore one group of victims because, according to you, they're a minority? That's what you're saying here. You're saying because, according to you, male victims of sexual assault are a minority, they shouldn't get the attention that they need. That doesn't sound very progressive.
A typical MRM member is a conservative, white male. Age ranges from teenagers to elderly men.
Okay, I see this non-argument all the time in articles, and it's a weird argument, and I'll get to why in a second. Okay, first of all, let's deal with the conservative part. The men's rights movement is non-political, right? We don't support the right or the left. Individual MRAs may be to the right or to the left, or like myself in the centre, but as a movement, we are neither a left-wing or a right-wing movement. So the reason why you're categorising us as conservatives is because you're a progressive and you think we're the exact opposite of what you are, right? It has nothing to do with reality. You're just assuming that we believe the exact opposite of what you believe in everything, without any research or without bothering to talk to us or actually go to a men's rights site. Strange, in the citations that you sent me, there wasn't one single MRA website. Strange that, right? Strange that you have to get everything through the feminist filter, through the echo chamber, just to make sure that it supports your narrative, as opposed to actually searching out the truth like an actual journalist should. But anyway, let's move on to the male part. Well, are you surprised at that? Are you surprised that the majority of people in a movement dealing with men's issues would be men? I mean, is that a shock? Is it a shock to you that the majority of feminists are female? I mean, it's not a shock to me. It's a weird thing to bring up, unless, of course, you think that's a bad thing. Just like you think being a conservative is a bad thing, right? Are your true colours showing, Rachel? Are we getting a little look into your soul here? Do you think being a man is a bad thing? Otherwise, what's the point of bringing it up, right? And then, of course, there's the white part. Well, this is true in countries which are majority white, like America and Australia. But it's not true in places like India, which are not majority white, and there is a massive men's rights movement in India. Did you know about that, Rachel? Of course you didn't, because you didn't do any research into it, did you? There's also a men's rights movement in Korea, which, surprisingly, isn't majority white. But why is the men's rights movement in America majority white? Because it's a majority white country. Just like feminism in America is majority white. Just like, accountants in America are majority white. Bricklayers in America are majority white. Because it's a majority white country. But once again, I think we're seeing a little look into Rachel's soul here, into her psyche, because she's saying white as if it's a bad thing. Otherwise, why bring it up? Why bring it up when you're talking about a majority white country? And for the record, we're not anti-black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever. There are plenty of MRAs who happen to be of all ethnic backgrounds. It's just in a majority white country, you will get majority white in just about any group. But folks, now we've finally arrived at that point that I've been hinting at since the start of this video, where Rachel is going to make a very, very offensive argument, which is going to piss off a lot of people. I know it pissed me off, and no doubt it's going to piss the majority of you off as well. So let's see what she's got to say.
Sometimes, even women join. Women in the MRM are often forced into it by their husbands. There are accounts of women being beaten by their husbands if they speak against it.
Wow. Now, I did warn you that you'd be pissed off at that, and I'm expecting everyone who's watching this is exceptionally angry right now. And this is why it's amusing that Rachel would get so offended that someone called her a bad person after she's made these allegations towards us, with absolutely no evidence. Speaking of which, let's have a look at her tweet when I asked her for a citation for this. Because she does say there are accounts of women being beaten by their husband. That would suggest that there is some publicly recorded thing somewhere that she's referring to, which, you know, none of us have actually ever heard of. But of course, that's not what she's referring to at all. Her response to me was, "Hi, I would be happy to provide you with sources that I used. I actually spoke to 2 women who wish to remain anonymous," that's convenient, "who were beaten by their husbands who are self-proclaimed Menonists." Yeah, your alarm bells should be ringing right about now. So, Menonists, huh? Now, I see a couple of possibilities here. The first one is Rachel has just made this up. And the reason why I say that is, well, there's no way she can back up her claim with these 2 anonymous women who are apparently in a relationship with a Menonist, or with Menonists. So there's no actual evidence she can put forward to support it, conveniently. But if she did interview 2 women who were beaten by their MRA husbands, why wouldn't she mention that in the article? If I was in Rachel's position, if I was a feminist writing an article about MRAs, and I interviewed 2 women who were beaten by their husbands and forced into the movement, I would say that I interviewed 2 women who were beaten by their husbands and forced into the movement. And I would have quotes from them, and I would make it a major part of the article. What I wouldn't do is say there have been accounts of women being beaten by their husbands, because that's not true. There haven't been accounts, at least not public accounts, right? These are private accounts, told secretly to Rachel in confidence, where none of us can actually see what was said or who said it, or what motivations they might have in saying it, or if they even existed in the first place. How very, very convenient for Rachel. So I suspect Rachel just made this up. She assumed that if women are going to advocate for the rights of men, then they must be forced into it, right? I mean, why else would a woman do that, Rachel? I mean, you know, it's not like some women might actually care about men and men's issues. You know, they might care about male suicide or male victims of rape, or, you know, it's not like women have husbands and sons and brothers and other, you know, male friends and relatives who they might care for. No, they have to be forced into it. Otherwise, they would be putting women first, right? And by women first, I mean only women, right, Rachel? So yeah, I suspect that she may have just made this up, and when I asked for a citation, conveniently, these 2 anonymous women were invented out of thin air, which of course none of us can check. And then Rachel slipped up by calling them Menonists. And when Karen and myself had a bit of a laugh at that, she didn't contact us back after that. She went silent, surprisingly, and then started playing victim. But, you know, I'll get to those tweets next episode. Now, I did say that's only one possibility. The other possibility is she did speak to some women. Now, where she got in contact with these women, I don't know, because, I know most of the prominent female MRAs, so I don't know who these female MRAs are. I guess they could be doing something somewhere, but how would she find them and get in contact with them? Don't know. But let's assume she did. How do we know that these women are actually involved with men's rights activists? Oh, sorry, I mean meninists, right? Now, if she did get in contact with two actual living, breathing women who told her this stuff, the fact that they refer to their husbands as meninists is a pretty big indicator that they're full of shit, that they're making it up. And, that would never happen, right? Someone would never make up things to shit all over the men's rights movement. I mean, that's never happened before. Except, of course, all the times that it has. Some of you may remember that I exposed someone called Dawn a couple of years ago who made some fairly serious allegations against the men's rights movement, claiming that we were trying to shut down women's shelters in Canada. Of course, when I asked for some evidence of this, she couldn't provide any, conveniently. But I had a little bit of a closer look at Dawn, and her story of working in a domestic abuse shelter for something like, I think it was 25 years or something, didn't stand up, because she claimed that she was in an abusive marriage for quite a long time. I estimated the minimum amount of time she would have been in that marriage based on the age of her daughter and the story that she told, and then taking into account her age, there's no way that she could have worked in a domestic abuse shelter for as long as she claimed. Unless, of course, she was working in the domestic abuse shelter at exactly the same time she was in this abusive, controlling relationship where the man wouldn't let her out of the house. So one of those things had to be a lie, right? It's unlikely that an abusive husband who won't let you leave the house is going to let you leave the house to work part-time in a domestic abuse shelter. Unlikely that's going to happen, right? And if she was working in a domestic abuse shelter while in a relationship with him, I would think that domestic abuse shelter would help her get away from that situation. I also caught her out using sock accounts to leave positive replies to her own comments, which isn't a major crime, but it does go to her validity as an honest person. The next thing, though, pretty serious. I caught her sending an email to the skeptic feminists claiming to be a male victim of domestic abuse, and in that message she said that male victims, in her opinion, as a male victim, don't really need any domestic violence services in Canada. So here we have a feminist pretending to be a male victim to undermine male victims of domestic abuse. Wonderful. Really wonderful stuff. But this is the same person that around that time claimed that she had cancer and was dying and had a month to live, and that, there was no hope, that she was going to be dead in a month. There was no coming back from it. It was terminal. It was that serious. And then she popped up a year and a half later with a different name. Yeah, there are liars out there. There are many, many liars out there who will, in some cases, compulsively lie, and in other cases lie because of political reasons. And that's why it's important that we have access to proper information to ascertain whether they're telling the truth or not. Now, I can understand if these women did exist and they were serious and legit, that they might not want to put their names out in the public. I get that. But you can tell a little bit more about their story to see if it's valid. You can give us a bit more information about them and their situation so we can have some kind of context. For example, if they say that they were in a relationship with meninists, yeah, it's pretty clear to say that it's bullshit. But I do take this as a very, very serious accusation, especially considering I'm such good friends with so many prominent female MRAs. And the interesting thing about those female MRAs is their male partners tend not to be involved in the men's rights movement. These women are doing it because they fucking want to, because they care, not because they're forced into it. And claiming that they're forced into it based on the threat of violence is a fucking bullshit thing to say, especially if Rachel has made it up. Anyway, we're almost done, so let's go on to the final bit of the article.
This movement is gaining numbers quickly and effectively. It is a scary notion that the MRM is recruiting younger men now. Younger men have much more impressionable minds, and putting the idea that women are lesser than men in their heads will only push us further back in time for women.
Okay, so let's start with the easily debunked bullshit here. MRAs do not think that women are lesser than men, nor do we want to turn women's rights back in time. This is bullshit. It has no bearing on reality. It resembles nothing to do with reality. And Rachel has just made these assumptions. Now, you'll notice that nowhere in her article does she actually talk to MRAs or actually go to a men's rights site. She said she went to Reddit, but fuck knows who she looked at there, if she even did that. I'm assuming if she did, she probably went to the Red Pill, which is not a men's rights Reddit. But, you know, why stick with the facts, right, Rachel? Much easier just to make shit up and make assumptions about people because, you know, it's a lot easier. You can churn out a piece of shit like this in 10 minutes. You know, as opposed to trying to understand the people that you're actually writing about and maybe getting to know their positions and to reflect them in an honest manner. Who wants to do that, right? That requires hard work. And, you know, modern day journalists don't bother doing that. Like I said, Rachel will be writing for BuzzFeed in no time whatsoever. Now, as for the bit about young men being more impressionable, well, yeah, young people in general tend to be more impressionable. Obviously, this depends on the individual. And that's because they have less life experience. Having said that, you know, I've known some very, very intelligent young people and some very, very stupid older people. But in a general sense, yes, younger people tend to have less life experience and can be easily influenced by any group. And do you know the group which is influencing the most young people at the moment, Rachel? It's not the men's rights movement, unfortunately. It's feminism. Feminism has seeped its way into universities, into high schools, and even primary schools, not to mention the mass media, and is brainwashing a whole generation of young people. More and more I'm beginning to think of them as the lost generation, because I think a lot of them we just can't change their minds. I recently had a conversation with a 23-year-old who's quite intelligent, but she brought up the wage gap as if it was a fact. And her position was that, you know, women get paid less for doing exactly the same work. And I tried to explain to her that no, the wage gap is actually adding up everyone's wages and dividing by gender. And because men typically do longer work and are more likely to be injured or die at work, they typically earn more money, which is, you know, fair. It's actually an earnings gap, not a wage gap. And I showed her the information and, you know, I made a legitimate argument and she changed the topic. It was too much for her to understand, to take in. I effectively gave her a handful of red pills and she spat them all out. And she had no arguments against what I was saying. She couldn't argue against it. There was no facts that she had that she could argue against it. The only thing she could do was to change the topic, because it was just too much for her to compute, to understand that that's not the way the world is, that she's actually been lied to. It's sad, and that's brainwashing. But there is a whole generation which is believing these myths like the pay gap, and they won't change their mind because it's part of their identity. This young woman I was talking about is convinced that she's a second-class citizen, and I find that really insidious. It's evil in a way, because she's been convinced of this based on a lie. And that's why feminists like to promote the wage gap so much. because it's easy to convince a whole generation of young women that they're actually second-class citizens, that they're victims. And once you do that, convincing them of the feminist narrative, that women are oppressed by the evil men's, it's easy. That's why, despite 40 years of debunking the wage gap, it still sticks around. It's still a talking point by feminists. So you might have a point about MRAs brainwashing young men, Rachel. But, you know, I tell you what, we'll talk about that once we get feminism out of schools and out of the university system and out of the workplace and out of everywhere else that it's brainwashing the masses, right? Once we deal with that, then maybe we'll have a discussion about if MRAs are doing the same thing. Spoilers, we're not. Stay tuned for part 2. It should be up relatively soon.
It goes on to say, MRA members have described their posters as a parody of the original and wanted to counter the perceived threat of rape as a gendered issue. It must be really inconvenient for these dudes that men keep attacking women and making their campaigns looking even more ludicrous. Okay, you know, first of all, why would you put the word parody in quotation marks? Is that not an accurate description? Like, the one poster campaign was parodied by ours. I don't know. Secondly, yes, men keep attacking women, and the fact that this article only mentions them and leaves out the women that attack men and boys is exactly the means of gendering the issue of rape that those posters parodied. The fact that there are female victims of male offenders does not invalidate the point we were making, which was that if all women were smeared with the stigma of only those women who made false allegations, it would be seen by the hypocrites who designed and championed those posters as bigoted as we see the original. According to this writer's logic, the fact that there are black people who commit murder would justify a poster campaign aimed at all black people telling them not to commit murder.